A single sentence uttered with the chilling confidence of ingrained prejudice was about to put a $2.8 billion contract on ice and send shockwaves through an entire airline. Senior flight attendant Kelsey O'Malley. Her smile, a thin, dismissive line, looked down at the black man in seat 2A. He was impeccably dressed, reading financial reports on a tablet, but all she saw was someone who didn't belong. "Sir," she began, her voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear, "the amenities you're asking for are for first-class passengers only." She had no idea she was speaking to Peter Robertson, the CEO whose signature was the only thing standing between her airline and financial ruin. And he was about to pick up his pen. Peter Robertson felt the familiar low hum of the Boeing 777 vibrating through the plush leather of seat 2A. For most people, a transatlantic flight from New York to London was a draining necessity. For Peter, it was an 8-hour sanctuary of forced disconnection, a rare opportunity to think without the incessant ping of emails or the summons of his executive board. He adjusted his tie, the silk a deep burgundy, against his crisp white shirt, and turned his attention back to the tablet on his lap. The document displayed on the screen was code-named Project Nightingale. It was a masterpiece of logistics, a bespoke software suite developed by his company, AuraTech Innovations, designed to completely overhaul the operational infrastructure of Global Wings Alliance, one of the world's largest airline consortiums. It managed everything from ticketing and baggage handling to crew scheduling and predictive maintenance, promising to save the alliance billions over the next decade. The contract was worth $2.8 billion to AuraTech. But for Global Wings, it was a lifeline. They were bleeding money, struggling with outdated systems that caused cascading delays and infuriated customers. Project Nightingale was their Hail Mary pass, and Peter Robertson, as the founder and CEO of AuraTech, was the quarterback. His signature, which he planned to apply to the final hard copies in London the next day, was the final step. Peter wasn't born into this world of billion-dollar deals and first-class cabins. He'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Detroit, the son of an auto worker and a school teacher. He'd earned scholarships, worked 3 jobs to get through MIT, and built AuraTech from a garage startup into a global tech behemoth on the foundations of sheer brilliance and relentless determination. He never forgot where he came from, which is why he valued professionalism and respect above all else. He treated the janitor in his building with the same courtesy as a fellow CEO. It was a simple principle, yet one he found surprisingly rare in the circles he now moved in. At JFK's flagship terminal, the check-in process had been seamless. The Global Wings agent, a pleasant woman named Maria Sanchez, had greeted him with a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome, Mr. Robertson. We have you in 2A. It's a window seat, just as you requested. Please enjoy our Polaris lounge, and we'll begin boarding in approximately 45 minutes. It was professional, efficient, and respectful. It was the standard he expected. He spent his time in the lounge not sipping champagne, but reviewing the final technical addendums to the contract, his mind a whirlwind of code logistics and legal clauses. He was meticulous. Every detail mattered. When the boarding call for Flight 815 to Heathrow was announced, he packed his tablet into his sleek leather briefcase, straightened his suit jacket, and made his way to the gate. He was one of the first to board, preferring to settle in before the cabin filled up. He found his seat, stowed his briefcase in the overhead compartment, and settled into the spacious pod. He was looking forward to the flight. A decent meal, a glass of Macallan's 18, and several hours of uninterrupted work before getting some sleep. The meeting with the Global Wings Alliance board was at 10:00 a.m. London time. Everything was proceeding according to a perfectly calibrated plan. As the other first-class passengers began to file in, mostly men in similar suits, a well-known actress, an elderly couple on holiday, Peter felt a sense of calm. The hum of the engines was a lullaby of progress. The world he had built for himself was orderly, logical, and rewarded merit. He believed, perhaps naively, that the world at large was slowly but surely moving in the same direction. He was about to be reminded in the most public and demeaning way possible just how wrong he was. The disruption wouldn't come from a server crash or a flaw in his code. It would come from a woman with a name tag that read Kelsey and a heart full of assumptions. The cabin crew began their pre-flight dance, a flurry of activity, and practiced smiles. One flight attendant, a young man named Jeffrey, who introduced himself as the purser, offered Peter a pre-departure beverage. "Mr. Robertson, some champagne orange juice or water to get you started." "Just some sparkling water with a slice of lime, please." "Thank you, Jeffrey," Peter replied with a warm smile. The water arrived moments later, crisp and cold. The service was so far exemplary. Then came Kelsey O'Malley. She moved through the first-class cabin with an air of proprietary ownership, as if she were the lady of the manor, inspecting the staff. She had been flying for over 20 years, a fact she often mentioned, and she believed her seniority gave her an almost supernatural ability to size people up in an instant. Her eyes swept over the passengers, making silent judgments. The actress in 4D got an effusive, fawning greeting. The elderly couple in 3A and 3B were treated with a saccharine, sweet condescension. When her gaze landed on Peter in 2A, it paused. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, confusion followed by a subtle tightening of her lips. He was a black man, alone, in a suit that probably cost more than her monthly mortgage payment, sitting in one of the most expensive seats on the plane. In Kelsey's rigid, prejudiced worldview, the pieces didn't fit. She bypassed him completely, attending to the passenger in 2C across the aisle before circling back. She stopped beside his seat, not with the open, welcoming posture of her colleagues, but with a guarded stance, her arms crossed loosely. "Good afternoon," Peter said, looking up from his tablet. "I'm Peter Robertson in 2A. "I see that," she replied, her tone clipped. She glanced at his tablet, then at his face. "I just need to see your boarding pass." It was a strange request. He was already seated, had been, for 10 minutes, and the gate agent had checked it. The purser had already addressed him by name. But Peter, ever a believer in de-escalation, simply nodded. "Of course." He retrieved the pass from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. She took it and examined it under the cabin light for a fraction too long, as if searching for a forgery. She held it up, looked at the seat number 2A, and then looked at the seat itself, as if confirming it hadn't magically changed. "Everything in order?" Peter asked, his voice perfectly level. "For now," she said, handing the pass back. The implication hung in the air, thick and unpleasant. She then turned to the white man in the seat behind him, and her entire demeanor transformed. "Mr. Henderson, so good to see you again. The usual Glenlivet. 15 after takeoff." Peter took a slow, deep breath, letting the insult wash over him without reacting. He'd faced this his entire life. The surprise in the eyes of venture capitalists when he, not his white co-founder, was the lead engineer. The security guards who tailed him in high-end stores. The random selection for extra screening at airports. It was a tax he paid for being black and successful in a world that still struggled to reconcile the two. Usually he ignored it. It was background noise. But there was something particularly grating about Kelsey's performance. It was overt, personal, and profoundly unprofessional. Sitting across the aisle in seat 2D was Dr. Ann Peterson, a sociology professor from Columbia University, specializing in racial and organizational behavior. She had her notebook out, intending to jot down thoughts for an upcoming paper. Now she had a real-world case study unfolding right in front of her. She watched the exchange, her academic mind dissecting every nuance, the targeted verification, the dismissive tone, the immediate and contrasting warmth shown to the white passenger. It was a textbook example of implicit bias manifesting as a microaggression. She made a small note, F.A. O'Malley, overt suspicion, toward Pax 2A. Black male versus immediate familiarity with Pax 3A, white male. She had no idea how important her notes would become. Peter tried to put the incident out of his mind. He was a CEO. He dealt with multi-billion-dollar problems. He wasn't going to let one ignorant flight attendant ruin his focus. He returned to Project Nightingale, immersing himself in the elegant complexity of his company's creation. But the chill from the encounter lingered. The air in his little bubble of luxury had been poisoned, and the flight had barely even begun. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign pinged off and the cabin crew began the meal service. It was a well-orchestrated affair, a performance of luxury at 35,000 feet. Jeffrey the purser came by with a wine list and the menu addressing Peter with the same professional warmth as before. Mr. Robertson, our dinner service will begin shortly. Can I interest you in an aperitif? We have a lovely Sancerre that pairs beautifully with the seared scallops appetizer. That sounds excellent, Jeffrey. Thank you, Peter said, grateful for the return to normalcy. But as Jeffrey moved away, Kelsey took over their section of the cabin. She moved with a deliberate slowness, first laying out the crisp white linens and polished silverware for the other passengers. Peter watched as she took the meal order for the man in 2C, then the couple in row 3 laughing and chatting with them. She physically bypassed Peter's seat, walking past him to serve row 4. It was a move so blatant, so intentionally insulting that it could not be misinterpreted as an accident. Peter remained silent, his face a mask of calm neutrality. He refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. He simply waited. Internally, however, a cold anger was beginning to build. This was no longer about unconscious bias. This was a deliberate campaign of disrespect. Finally, after every other passenger in the forward cabin had been attended to, Kelsey stopped at his seat. She didn't have her notepad out. "What do you want?" she asked, the words stripped of any pretense of service. Peter looked at the menu Jeffrey had left. "I'll start with the seared scallops, and for the main course I believe I'll have the filet mignon medium rare." Kelsey scoffed a small, ugly sound. "We're already out of the filet. It's very popular. You can have the chicken or the pasta." Peter knew this was almost certainly a lie. He had been one of the first to board, and it was standard procedure for flight attendants to take meal orders from front to back. To be out of the most popular dish by the time she reached the second row was statistically improbable. He looked her directly in the eye. "You're out of the filet." "That's unfortunate. In that case, I'll have the chicken." His voice was steady, betraying no emotion. He would not engage. He would not argue. He would simply observe and document. Across the aisle, Dr. Peterson, who had just been served her own medium-rare filet mignon, nearly choked on her water. She knew for a fact the dish was available. She watched, fascinated and appalled, as Kelsey brought Peter's meal, while other passengers' trays were placed with care. Peters was set down with a clatter that was just a little too loud. The insults continued, small but accumulating like 1,000 paper cuts. His water glass remained empty while others were refilled. When he requested a glass of the Macallan 18, he'd been looking forward to, Kelsey returned with a lesser brand. "The Macallan is for our global premier members," she said with a smug smile. Peter knew for a fact that his ticket booked through his corporate account was the highest tier available. He was a global premier member. He decided to test her. "Could you double-check that my account is tied to my frequent flyer number?" She waved a dismissive hand. "The manifest says what it says. It's the Johnny Walker or nothing." "The Johnny Walker is fine," Peter said quietly. Each incident was a small log thrown onto a smoldering fire. Peter remained placid on the surface, but inside his mind was working with the cold precision of a computer algorithm. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was the CEO of a technology company that had a $2.8 billion contract on the line with this airline's parent company, a contract predicated on efficiency, service, and flawless execution. And he was currently experiencing a complete and utter system failure in customer relations. He started making mental notes, time-stamping each slight, each lie, each moment of disrespect. The data points were adding up, and the conclusion they were leading to was damning. The most egregious moment came halfway through the flight. Peter was working on his tablet when he reached for his glass of water. As Kelsey passed by in the aisle, her hip jostled his arm, accidentally. The glass tipped over, spilling ice-cold water all over his trousers and the corner of his leather briefcase on the floor. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Kelsey snapped, not at her own clumsiness, but at him. "You need to be more careful with where you put your things." She made a cursory, impatient dab at the puddle with a single napkin, and then walked off, leaving him to deal with the mess. There was no apology, no offer of more napkins or a blanket to cover his soaked trousers. There was only blame. That was the moment the equation in Peter's mind shifted. This was no longer just about personal disrespect. This was a liability. The woman's behavior was a walking, talking representation of a brand that was fundamentally broken. And his company AuraTech was about to tie its pristine reputation to that broken brand. The risk analysis was no longer looking good. The sanctuary of the sky had become a hostile environment, and the cost of Kelsey O'Malley's prejudice was about to be calculated. Hours bled into one another. Peter, despite his damp trousers and the simmering indignation, continued to work. He was a professional. He would not be derailed. He requested a blanket from Jeffrey, who brought one immediately with a sincere apology for the spill, casting a worried glance in Kelsey's direction. It was clear to Peter that Jeffrey was aware of the situation, but felt powerless or unwilling to confront his senior colleague. This in itself was another data point, a failure of internal management. As the flight began its initial descent toward London, the crew started preparing the cabin for landing. Peter decided he needed one more item to complete his assessment. It was a final test of the system. He pressed the call button. A few moments later, Kelsey appeared, her expression one of utter annoyance. "The seatbelt sign is on," she said, her voice sharp. "We're landing." "I'm aware," Peter replied calmly. "I just have a quick question. I saw on the menu that you offer a premium amenity kit from the brand Airline for first-class passengers. I didn't receive one earlier. Could I get one to freshen up before we land?" It was a simple standard request. The Airline kits with their high-end moisturizers, lip balms, and facial mists were a signature perk of the Global Wings International first-class experience. Kelsey's face, already a mask of contempt, hardened into something uglier. She looked at him, then let her eyes drift around the cabin as if to draw an audience. Several passengers, including Dr. Peterson, were now overtly watching the drama unfold. "Sir," Kelsey began, her voice dripping with a syrupy, condescending poison that she clearly mistook for authority. "I don't know what part of this you're not understanding." She leaned in, slightly, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss that was somehow more insulting than a shout. "Those little black bags with the fancy lotions. They are for first-class passengers." She paused for dramatic effect, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the final fatal blow. "The amenities you're asking for are for first class only. Your ticket, whatever kind of upgrade you manage to get, it clearly doesn't include the full service. Maybe you should stick to what's offered in economy." The words "economy only" echoed in the quiet cabin. It was the ultimate insult, a verbal demotion delivered with smug satisfaction. She had finally said the quiet part out loud. "You don't belong here. Don't belong." A collective gasp went through the nearby seats. The man in 2C looked shocked. The elderly couple in row 3 looked deeply uncomfortable. Before Peter could even formulate a response, a clear, authoritative voice cut through the tension from across the aisle. "That is an outrageous and patently false statement," Dr. Ann Peterson said, her eyes flashing with academic fury. She had unbuckled her seatbelt and was half standing in her pod. "I am sitting right here, and I can personally attest that this man has been subjected to your unprofessional and discriminatory behavior for this entire flight. You lied about the availability of the filet mignon, you have ignored his requests for service, and now you are publicly humiliating him with baseless accusations about his ticket class. Your conduct is a disgrace to this airline." Kelsey whirled around, her face pale with shock and anger. "Ma'am, this is a private matter between a crew member and a passenger. I must ask you to sit down and fasten your seatbelt." It stopped being a private matter when you decided to project your bigotry across the entire cabin, Dr. Peterson retorted, holding up her small notebook. "And for the record, I have been documenting every single microaggression and service failure for the last 7 hours. I am a professor of sociology at Columbia, and I would be more than happy to provide my expert testimony in any official complaint." The situation had now completely imploded. Jeffrey, the purser, rushed forward, his face panicked. "Kelsey, what's going on here?" "This passenger," Kelsey spat, pointing a trembling finger at Peter, "is being disruptive and making unreasonable demands." Peter finally spoke, his voice low and steady, yet it cut through the chaos with the sharpness of a diamond. "Jeffrey," he said, not even looking at Kelsey, "the only unreasonable thing here is the assumption that my skin color dictates my seat assignment. I paid for seat 2A. I expect the service that comes with it. Instead, I have been treated like a stowaway." The commotion had attracted the attention of the cockpit. The door opened and Captain Miller, a veteran pilot with silvering hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, emerged. "What is the problem here?" he demanded, his eyes surveying the scene. Kelsey immediately tried to win him over. "Captain, this passenger is refusing to follow instructions and is agitating others." But Captain Miller's eyes were on Peter, who sat calmly amidst the storm he had not created but was now forced to navigate. He saw the expensive suit, the intelligent eyes, the utter lack of panic. Then he looked at Dr. Peterson, who stood her ground, radiating academic authority. And finally he looked at Kelsey, whose story was already unraveling in her frantic expression. "Is that true, sir?" the captain asked Peter directly. "No, Captain," Peter said simply. "It is not. But I believe this can all be resolved on the ground. I have no desire to delay this flight's arrival. Please, everyone, sit down." It was a command delivered with the quiet authority of a man used to being obeyed. Reluctantly, Dr. Peterson sat buckling her seatbelt with a snap of defiance. Jeffrey guided a fuming Kelsey back toward the galley. Captain Miller gave Peter a long, assessing look, nodded once, and returned to the cockpit. The spell was broken, but the damage was done. The line had been crossed at 35,000 feet, and for Kelsey O'Malley, the ground was rushing up to meet her far faster than the plane was. Peter Robertson picked up his tablet. His work on Project Nightingale was done. A new, far more urgent project had just taken its place. The rest of the descent was thick with an unbearable tension. Kelsey O'Malley did not re-emerge from the galley. Jeffrey and another flight attendant completed the pre-landing checks with grim, tight-lipped efficiency, avoiding eye contact with everyone involved. As the plane taxied to the gate at Heathrow, Peter felt a profound sense of disappointment. The incident had tainted what was supposed to be a triumphant trip. He wasn't just angry. He was weary. Weary of having to constantly prove his worth, his place, his very existence in spaces where others were simply allowed to be. When the plane finally docked and the seatbelt sign switched off, Peter remained seated, letting the other passengers disembark. He was in no hurry. Dr. Ann Peterson paused as she passed his seat. "Mr. Robertson," she said, her voice sincere, "I am so sorry you had to endure that. If you need a witness for a formal complaint, please do not hesitate to ask." She discreetly passed him her business card. "Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Your support means more than you know." Peter replied, accepting the card. "I may just take you up on that." He was the last passenger to leave the first-class cabin. As he stepped into the jet bridge, he saw Jeffrey standing by the aircraft door, his expression deeply troubled. "Mr. Robertson," Jeffrey began, his voice low, "on behalf of the crew, I am truly sorry for what happened on this flight. It was unacceptable." Peter looked at him, his gaze level and unreadable. "Was it Jeffrey? You were the purser. You are in a position of leadership. You saw what was happening from the very beginning. You saw it, and you did nothing until it exploded. Your apology is noted." Jeffrey flinched as if struck. The polite but firm rebuke hit its mark. Peter didn't wait for a response. He walked down the jet bridge, his face a mask of calm determination. He was no longer just a passenger. He was Peter Robertson, CEO of AuraTech, and the gears of his mind were already turning, executing a plan with cold, swift precision. He bypassed the long lines at immigration, using the automated gates for registered travelers. As he walked toward baggage claim, he pulled out his phone. He did not call the airline's customer service hotline. He did not draft an angry email. Such methods were for ordinary customers with ordinary complaints. His situation was now anything but ordinary. He dialed the number of his executive assistant, Jessica, back in New York, who was legendary for her efficiency. It was the middle of the night for her, but she answered on the first ring, her voice instantly alert. "Peter, you've landed. Is everything all right?" "Jessica, I need you to do 3 things for me immediately. First, cancel the black car service I have waiting for me. I'll be taking a taxi. Second, I need you to get Frank Donovan on the phone. He's the Executive VP of Operations for Global Wings Alliance, North Atlantic Division. Tell his assistant it is an urgent matter regarding the final sign-off for Project Nightingale. Set a video call for 9:00 a.m. London time, which is in about an hour and a half. Make it clear this call is non-negotiable." "Okay," Jessica said at the sound of typing already audible in the background. "Cancel the car. Secure a non-negotiable call with Frank Donovan at 9 a.m. "What's the third thing?" Peter paused, his eyes hardening. Third, I need you to get me the full crew manifest for Global Wings Flight 815 New York to Heathrow, which landed today, August 31st. I want the full name and employee ID of every single flight attendant on that plane, particularly the senior purser and a flight attendant named Kelsey. There was a moment of silence on Jessica's end. Then, understood. It might take some doing to get a manifest, but I have a contact in their corporate liaison office. I'll get it. Peter, is the deal in jeopardy? Every deal is in jeopardy until the ink is dry, Jessica, he said. Let's just say we're reassessing the human interface components of our new strategic partnership. I'll brief you after my call with Mr. Donovan. He hung up. He walked past the car service area where a driver was holding a sign that read, Robertson, and exited the terminal, joining the queue for a traditional London black cab. He didn't want the comfort and privilege of a pre-arranged car. He wanted the anonymity of a taxi, a moment to himself, to codify his thoughts before the corporate battle began. As the cab sped through the early morning London traffic towards his hotel, Peter looked out at the city lights. He felt no rage, no desire for petty revenge. He felt a profound sense of duty, a duty to his company, to protect it from a partnership with a brand whose culture was clearly toxic, a duty to himself to uphold the dignity he had fought so hard to earn, and a duty to every other person who had ever been made to feel small, to feel like they didn't belong. Kelsey O'Malley thought she was just insulting a passenger. She had no idea she had just become a multi-million-dollar liability on a corporate balance sheet. The trial she had conducted in the court of her own prejudice was over. Now a new trial was about to begin in a boardroom, and Peter Robertson would be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. In a glass-walled office high above Canary Wharf, Frank Donovan, Executive Vice President of Global Wings Alliance, was having a magnificent morning. He sipped his espresso, looking over the final draft of the press release. Global Wings Alliance soars into the future with landmark $2.8 billion. AuraTech Partnership. The headline read. This deal, Project Nightingale, was his baby. He had championed it for 2 years, convincing a skeptical board that this massive investment was the only way to save the airline from its downward spiral of inefficiency and customer dissatisfaction. The signature from AuraTech's CEO, Peter Robertson, due to happen in just a few hours, was the culmination of his entire career. He was already imagining the bonuses, the accolades, the promotion to the C-suite. His bliss was shattered when his assistant buzzed in her voice, tight with panic. Frank, I have Jessica Chen from AuraTech on the line. She says Mr. Robertson needs to speak with you urgently. She called it non-negotiable. Frank's stomach dropped. Non-negotiable, the signing is at 10 a.m. Is he cancelling? I don't know, but she was very firm. She said it's regarding the final sign-off. He wants a video call with you at 9 a.m. A cold sweat broke out on Frank's brow. An urgent, non-negotiable call, an hour before the biggest signing in his company's history, could only mean one thing: disaster. Set it up. Now. He barked, his good mood evaporating completely. For the next 55 minutes, Frank paced his office like a caged animal, his mind racing through every possible catastrophe. Had a rival tech firm swooped in with a better offer? Was there a last-minute legal snag? Did their stock price dip overnight? At precisely 9:00 a.m., the video call connected. Peter Robertson's face appeared on the large screen in Frank's office. He was not in a boardroom as Frank expected. He was in a hotel suite, dressed immaculately in his suit, but his tie was slightly loosened. He looked calm, but it was the calm of a Category 5 hurricane's eye. Peter, good to see you. Frank began trying to inject a false heartiness into his voice. A bit of a last-minute chat before the big moment, eh? Getting cold feet. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled croak. Peter did not smile. Frank, he said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth, I'm calling to inform you that the 10 a.m. signing is postponed indefinitely. The words hit Frank Donovan like a physical blow. He staggered back and sank into his chair. Postponed, Peter. What are you talking about? The board is assembling. The press is on standby. This is a $2.8 billion deal. You can't just postpone it. Oh, I can, Frank, Peter replied, his voice dropping to an icy calm. And I have. My signature will not appear on any document binding my company to yours today, and I need to tell you exactly why. For the next 15 minutes, Peter Robertson recounted the events of Flight 855. He did not raise his voice. He did not use emotional language. He spoke with the dispassionate precision of an engineer detailing a catastrophic system failure. He detailed the boarding pass incident, the deliberate service snubs, the lie about the filet mignon, the targeted questioning of his membership status, the accidental water spill, and finally the public humiliation involving the amenity kit and the sneering suggestion that he belonged in economy. He mentioned the purser Jeffrey by name, citing a failure of leadership. He named the flight attendant, Kelsey O'Malley, as the primary source of the hostile and discriminatory environment. He even mentioned the unsolicited intervention of a fellow passenger, a Columbia University professor who had taken meticulous notes. As Frank Donovan listened, his face went from red to ghostly white. This wasn't a complaint. This was an indictment. The CEO of their single most important new partner had been systematically harassed by one of his own employees on a flagship international flight. The irony was gut-wrenching. A company signing a multi-billion-dollar deal to fix its systemic failures was displaying its most toxic failure at the highest possible level. Peter, I am speechless, Frank stammered when Peter finished. This is horrifying, unacceptable. I will have her head on a platter. I will personally see to it that this woman is fired before the day is out. We'll make it right. A personal apology, we can compensate you, upgrade you for life. Peter held up a hand, cutting him off. Frank, you're missing the point. This isn't about about me. And it's not about one bad apple. Your purser, a manager, stood by and did nothing. That's not a personnel problem. That's a cultural problem. It's a rot. My company, AuraTech, has a brand built on precision excellence and integrity. We are about to link that brand to yours. Project Nightingale is designed to fix your logistical problems, but I'm now forced to question if your human problems are too deep to fix. He leaned closer to his camera. The contract is postponed, Frank, not cancelled. Yet. I expect a full and thorough investigation into this incident. I expect a detailed report on my desk by Monday morning, outlining not just the disciplinary action taken against the individuals involved, but the concrete, actionable steps Global Wings Alliance will be taking to address the systemic cultural issues that allowed this to happen. I want to see new training protocols, new accountability measures, and a new standard for customer respect. Frank was sweating profusely, his mind reeling. The deal wasn't dead, but it was on life support, and Peter Robertson had his finger on the plug. You'll have it, Peter. You'll have it all. I will move heaven and earth, Frank promised, his voice trembling. You do that, Peter said. My signature and the $2.8 billion that comes with it depends on it. We are supposed to be partners, Frank, and right now I have zero confidence in my partner's ability to perform. You have until Monday to change my mind." The screen went blank. Frank Donovan sat in stunned silence for a full minute. Then he grabbed his phone and jabbed the speed dial for Heathrow's head of in-flight services. His voice was no longer the smooth baritone of an executive. It was the roar of a wounded lion. "Get me the crew of Flight 815 from JFK. Get them now, nobody goes home. And find me a flight attendant named Kelsey O'Malley. Her career with this airline is over." The Karma that had been circling at 35,000 feet had finally brutally landed. For Kelsey O'Malley, the walk from the aircraft to the crew briefing room at Heathrow was a victory lap of self-righteousness. She strode through the bustling terminal corridors, her mind a cinematic reel replaying the flight's final dramatic moments. In her version of events, she was the steadfast hero. A veteran of the skies, upholding the standards of a once great airline against the entitlement of the modern world. The man in 2A was a classic case, probably some tech bro who'd used a family member's points to upgrade and didn't understand the unwritten rules of the cabin. He was arrogant and demanding. The woman in 2D was an interfering academic busybody, the worst kind of passenger, always looking for something to be offended by. Kelsey mentally rehearsed the scathing report she would file. She'd paint Peter Robertson as disruptive, and Jeffrey Hudson as weak and ineffective a purser who had failed to back up his senior crew. 23 years she had given this airline. She knew people. She had an instinct for who belonged and who didn't, and her gut had been screaming that the man in 2A was an impostor in a world he hadn't earned. The crew was instructed to wait in the main briefing room, a stark, functional space that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The instruction was unusual. Normally, they were released within 20 minutes of clearing customs. A wave of grumbling filled the room as flight attendants and pilots sank into the uncomfortable chairs, their exhaustion warring with a growing sense of unease. "What's this about?" One of the junior attendants whispered. "Did we have a security breach? Probably some new corporate nonsense." Another replied, rolling her eyes. Jeffrey sat apart from the group, his face pale and clammy. He nervously checked his phone, avoiding Kelsey's triumphant gaze. He knew this wasn't about a new policy. He had felt the seismic shift in the cabin when the captain had intervened. He had seen the look in Peter Robertson's eyes, not of anger, but of cold, calculated assessment. It was the look of a man who doesn't lose arguments. 10 minutes later, the door swung open with a force that silenced the room. Two figures entered, and the atmosphere instantly changed from weary annoyance to acute dread. The first was Sarah Jenkins, the head of in-flight services for the entire European sector. She was a legend in the company, a formidable woman with a reputation for being tough but fair. Beside her was a stern-looking man in a perfectly tailored dark suit they didn't recognize. He carried a leather portfolio and radiated an aura of corporate authority that made the pilots sit up straighter. Sarah Jenkins' eyes cold and hard as chips of granite scanned the room. They passed over the anxious faces before landing with pinpoint accuracy on Kelsey. "Kelsey O'Malley, Jeffrey Hudson, my office, now!" Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. Every head turned to stare. The walk to her glass-walled office down the corridor was the longest of their lives. Jeffrey felt a nauseating lurch in his stomach, his feet like lead. Kelsey, however, lifted her chin, her indignation a suit of armor. This was it, her chance to be heard by senior management to finally expose the declining standards she'd been complaining about for years. As soon as the door clicked shut, Sarah Jenkins's professional veneer dissolved into barely contained fury. "What in God's name did you do on my flight?" she demanded, her voice a low, dangerous growl. The man from HR remained standing, a silent, imposing sentinel by the door. "I was handling a difficult and disruptive passenger." Sarah Kelsey began launching into her well-rehearsed narrative. He was making unreasonable demands, refusing to accept that certain amenities were unavailable, and he became agitated. "Stop!" The HR manager interrupted. His voice was calm, yet it held an absolute finality that froze the words in Kelsey's throat. "Just stop talking. We have a preliminary report here, based on a video call that took place less than an hour ago between our Executive Vice President of Operations and the passenger in question. The passenger, Mr. Peter Robertson." Kelsey let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "And who is Peter Robertson, that his petty complaint gets the attention of an executive VP before the crew has even filed their own report?" Sarah Jenkins leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her massive oak desk. Her eyes bored into Kelsey's. "Peter Robertson," she said, enunciating each syllable with lethal precision, "is the founder and Chief Executive Officer of AuraTech Innovations." The name hung in the air. Kelsey's smile faltered. AuraTech. She'd seen the name in corporate newsletters, the breathless memos about Project Nightingale. It was the massive company-saving technology overhaul. Her mind began to spin, trying to connect the dots. The HR manager stepped forward, opening his portfolio. Mr. Robertson was flying to London to attend a 10:00 a.m. meeting with our entire executive board. At that meeting, he was scheduled to sign a contract for Project Nightingale, a contract Ms. O'Malley worth $2.8 billion. He paused, letting the astronomical figure sink in. "A contract that he has now put on indefinite hold because of your conduct. You didn't just insult a passenger, Kelsey. You just took a lit match to the single, most important business deal in this airline's last decade. You jeopardized the financial stability of this entire company and the paychecks of every single person who works for it, including your own." The armor of indignation shattered. The color drained from Kelsey's face, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. The man in 2A. The quiet, dignified man she had tormented for 7 hours. That man was worth billions. It wasn't possible. Her instincts, her infallible gut that had guided her for 23 years had led her off a cliff. "We have multiple witness statements already being collected." The HR manager continued, his tone clinical and detached. "A Dr. Ann Peterson of Columbia University, a passenger in 2D, has already emailed a detailed time-stamped log of your conduct. She describes it as, and I quote, a textbook case of racially motivated discrimination and harassment, executed with a deliberate and escalating pattern of malice. She has offered her services as an expert witness. The passenger in 2C has corroborated her story entirely. The man in 3A confirmed you lied about the filet mignon being unavailable." He turned his cold gaze on Jeffrey, who looked as if he was about to faint. "Mr. Hudson, your own preliminary statement admits you were aware of an escalating situation, and in your capacity as purser and direct supervisor, you failed to intervene. That constitutes a grave failure of leadership. That failure will be dealt with. It will result in a formal final reprimand on your record, a demotion from purser status for 1 year, and mandatory intensive management and de-escalation retraining." Jeffrey nodded numbly, a wave of sickening relief washing over him. It was brutal, but it wasn't the end. The HR manager turned back to Kelsey. But Ms. O'Malley, your actions fall into a different category entirely. Gross misconduct, willful brand endangerment. I have here the clause from your employment agreement regarding our airline's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. He slid a tablet across the desk. Your employment with Global Wings Alliance is terminated effective immediately. Kelsey stared at him, her world collapsing in on itself. The words didn't compute. Fired. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. No, you can't. I have 23 years of seniority. The union. Your union has already been notified. Kelsey. Sarah Jenkins, said, her voice now filled with a weary sadness. They were briefed on the circumstances and the catastrophic financial exposure. They will not protect you from this. The evidence is irrefutable. You are a liability we can no longer afford. You did this to yourself. The fight, the arrogance, the 2 decades of self-importance, it all evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, bewildered woman on the verge of tears. It was a mistake, she pleaded, her voice a desperate rasp. I misjudged the situation. You judged a man by the color of his skin. The HR manager corrected her flatly. And you were wrong. Airport security is waiting outside. They will escort you to collect your personal items from your locker, and then they will escort you from the premises. The arrival of 2 uniformed security officers sealed her fate. Kelsey O'Malley, the self-proclaimed queen of the cabin, was unceremoniously marched out of the office past the stunned and silent faces of her former crew. They now knew what had happened, the whispers spreading like wildfire. They didn't see a victim. They saw a ghost, a cautionary tale of a prejudice so profound it had nearly sunk them all. The ripple effects were immediate. By day's end, an emergency memo from the CEO was in every employee's inbox worldwide. It announced a mandatory top-to-bottom overhaul of all customer service de-escalation and implicit bias training to be designed by a leading third-party consultancy. It was a corporate earthquake. Meanwhile, in his suite at the Savoy, a thick dossier was delivered to Peter Robertson. It contained the full investigation report, confirmation of Kelsey's termination, and Jeffrey's disciplinary action, and a detailed multi-phase plan to address the cultural failings within Global Wings Alliance. It was followed by a personal, deeply apologetic phone call from the airline's CEO. Peter read the report carefully, his expression unreadable. He felt no joy at Kelsey's firing, only a deep sense of melancholy. Her personal ruin was not the goal. The goal was change. The airline's response, swift and comprehensive, showed him they understood the stakes. They had been shocked into a moment of genuine self-reflection. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Later that afternoon, he met Frank Donovan and the board. The atmosphere in the grand boardroom was not celebratory, but somber and deeply respectful. Before the contracts were presented, Peter stood and addressed the room. What happened on Flight 815 was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper issue, a culture that allowed prejudice to fester under the guise of seniority. Your response over the past 48 hours has been decisive. It has shown me that you are at the very least willing to treat the disease rather than just the symptom. My signature today is not an absolution. It is an investment in your commitment to change. Our partnership is contingent on you following through with every single reform you have proposed. He then took the heavy gold-plated fountain pen they offered him, and signed the document. A quiet, collective sigh of relief filled the room. Project Nightingale was alive. Peter Robertson never saw Kelsey O'Malley again. His victory wasn't in her firing, but in the systemic change her actions had inadvertently catalyzed. He had absorbed one of the most demeaning experiences of his life and transformed its ugly energy into a force for progress, ensuring that the next person who looked like him in seat 2A would be judged not by the ignorance of others, but by their own merit. The sky, he hoped, was now on a flight path to becoming a little more welcoming for everyone. Peter Robertson's story is a powerful reminder that prejudice and professionalism can never coexist. What Kelsey O'Malley saw as a moment to exert her perceived authority turned into a career-ending, multi-billion-dollar lesson in respect. It shows that in our interconnected world, you truly never know who you are talking to, and the person you choose to belittle might just be the one who holds the key to your entire organization's future. This wasn't just about one flight attendant. It was about the corporate culture that allowed her behavior to go unchecked. The karma here wasn't just swift, it was systemic, forcing an entire airline to confront its own biases. If you believe that accountability is essential and that respect is non-negotiable, hit that like button to show your support. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications for more incredible stories of karma and justice being served. What would you have done in Peter's situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.